Call this work session to order. Apologize for the late start. We were literally all coming across from the Permit Center at a Community Economic Development.
John ran too long.
Well, it was an important topic, and I appreciate that we had a chance to discuss it. So, I believe we have a presentation starting with Ms. Burke. Ms. Burke, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For those who've joined the Committee on Housing and Homelessness, are reviewing the work we're doing in our efforts to coordinate homelessness and connect that to housing, this is a deep dive, if you will, into two specific programs that are targeting very different parts of our homeless continuum. And so I wanted to just put up some slides that would be general introduction before we dive into the discussion today. This is just a reminder that we've had this history now of taking a snapshot count of the number of homeless people in the community. It ends up being around 1,100 or 1,200 people total, all populations. Some have higher needs, higher mental health, medical and substance use issues, and some have lower needs. And the strategies that you employ are different for each parts of the continuum. And so now, because we've adopted the practices that many communities across the country have adopted, we've organized the wait list for those housing resources. We have the one, some people call it a by name list. It's the community list for homeless housing referrals. It's housed in the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness. They've done this excellent job of building out this very complex way of organizing all of the prior, each agency had their own list, and so now we're getting to the point where we're organizing that, and we're not completely done organizing that, so I want to put in a little placeholder for these numbers that this is, as we go, we'll be able to give more real data, more actual in-the-moment data. But as of March 2018, we have 356 people who are waiting for the higher end of resources in the community, housing referrals. And we have 417 that are waiting for a more short-term resource that can be addressed with a different model. And so today we will actually be looking at, whoops, no, I've done it. I'm going to go right to this slide. We will be looking at grouping these, if you will, and this is a loose grouping, and we do have to get to know people individually to know exactly what their needs are. But basically, we can say high, medium, and low needs. And the way that this works out in the referrals and the housing world is that we say that anybody who's at a 4 on a scale that measures your history with mental health, addictions, or medical problems, we don't really need to do anything with these folks. They're going to go out, they're going to do their own thing and be on their own, really without us touching them with much other than resources or referrals. Then we have this larger group of moderate need, people who are between a 4 and a 9 on a scale to 17. These are people who probably need some time-limited assistance, some resource to help them get back on their feet, address whatever issue that came up for them that caused their homelessness episode. And then we have the high end, the 9 to 16. We don't have a person in our community who's 17 right now. It goes to 16. These are the people who need the ongoing permanent support. They have intensive needs, and we have some social service providers that are very skilled in those areas. So today I would like to turn this over to our partners. Cook Inlet Housing Authority and Widener Apartment Homes are going to speak to us about the Path to Independence program. And to just give a visual for that, that is going to be in this green area. It's referenced here along with some of the other programs that are rolling out this summer in this same green middle band area. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carol Gore, Dave Lehman, and Greg Cervana. And company? Kids! I have an entire row.
Okay, we can do our presentation.
You ready?
You want to take it on?
Sure, I will.
Good morning. We appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. So I want to start by maybe talking a little bit about how did we get here. It's pretty interesting to live in a town like Anchorage that I dearly love, where you often have this collision of unexpected conversations that can have outcomes like the path to independence. So I want to share with you how we got engaged, Cook Inlet Housing. You know us as a provider of affordable and workforce housing. We're not the homelessness experts at this table, and we have never been. But we see ourselves as being part of the paths as they come out of homelessness and really living in affordable housing. So I want to just give you sort of three different paths that happen for us. The first is, for us, we do have units that are set aside for homeless, largely the people that are in that green area that Nancy shared with you. They're scattered about town, and we see ourselves as a pretty compassionate landlord and one that gives folks a lot of extra chances. But from our perspective, those folks were not as successful as we thought they should be. So that was troubling to us, and a couple of years ago we created a position internally, VP of Community Advancement, to help us just get educated about how we could improve the outcomes of those folks that are living in our housing. So that was one conversation. The second conversation was I was invited into a discussion that was really a real estate transaction. And when we looked at the real estate transaction, we said, you know, honestly, you have deep capacity and resource gaps here. This is not your quick solution, and frankly, real estate's not your problem. It's the other things where you have these resource gaps and capacity gaps that's the problem. The last leg of the stool was Greg and I have been having these relatively soft conversations about really Widener Apartment Homes' interest in really engaging in the community and being part of the solution. So as we engaged in those conversations, we said, golly, we have a little bit of a soft market here. There's our real estate package. It's scattered about town. We have all these folks in the middle that have less resources available to them than those that are at the higher acuity end. So we said, how can we be part of a solution? And that's really what drew us to this new pilot, Paths to Independence. It is a pilot. We're going to try it on. So we're happy to educate you. We have a brief presentation. Maybe just we should quickly, I think you know Lisa Aquino from Catholic Social Services, and Greg Cervana from Widener Apartment Homes, and Gabe Lehman. So Gabe's going to take the lead from here, and you probably won't hear from me again because I'm not the expert at anything from here forward.
We'll see about that.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yes,
So we
you
actually
may.
did two introductions, my colleague just pointed out. So for the record, you all just introduced yourselves. Dean, could you introduce yourself for the record as well? Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant. John Weddleton.
Big Train.
Pete Peterson.
Thank you. And I got a text, I believe Eric Croft is on the way, but please continue.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what are you going to hear from us today? So we're going to frame the challenge that was presented to us and kind of our plan of attack. What are the purposes of the program and its objectives? We'll talk a little bit about eligibility. Who's the population that this program is geared toward? Because as you folks well know, not all homeless populations have the same needs or need the same interventions. We'll talk a little bit about what are the basic program components of Path to Independence. Who are the community partners that are engaged, who's involved in this effort, and what's our timeline look like? When does this thing roll out and people start getting housed? So we'll start with this. What was the challenge that we were facing here? And what was the overarching goal of Path to Independence? So at the root of this, the idea is that we have homeless populations. We want to quickly house those homeless populations, period, and we want to make sure we do that in a way that keeps them housed permanently. The challenge presented is this, right? We know we have at least 1,200 homeless individuals in Anchorage according to a point-in-time count. And you know, that's one measure of homelessness in town. There are estimates of additional homeless individuals who are, for example, couch surfing, et cetera. But the point-in-time count tells us we've got at least 1,200 individuals who are sleeping on our streets at night. Private organizations in Anchorage are often asked to engage in a very traditional model, right? The traditional model is donors, whether it's a corporate donor or a foundation donor or a government funder, they provide resources, and then nonprofits go out and change the world, right? And part of the challenge here is we wanted to consider how the private sector in particular could be challenged to engage in some non-traditional ways. And then finally, we recognize that the number one self-identified barrier for exiting homelessness among the homeless population was a lack of employment and a lack of income. So with those challenges in mind, we decided to frame our opportunity.
Let me ask you a question, this last
Please.
comment.
Mr. Trainee.
You've got 1,200 homeless people out there. Lack of employment and income are the most reported causes of homelessness. How about the vast majority that don't want to be homed? If you read the article yesterday in the paper from the former judge, she points out there's a lot that do not want to live in a home.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Trainee. To be very clear on this, you have different homeless populations, right? Path to Independence is not targeting and it is a substantial number of individuals who are what we would refer to as having a higher acuity level. We are focused on, a good example would be this. The story that I heard secondhand was an individual who was, I want to say, a carpenter, self-employed, tools in his vehicle was broken into, tools stolen. And essentially that's his livelihood, didn't have appropriate savings, living paycheck to paycheck, loses his ability to make a livelihood. Next thing you know, he's in an eviction situation, living in a vehicle, and it becomes tough to climb out of that cycle. Path to Independence is geared towards populations like that, individuals who are living on the edge.
They want to get out of that situation.
And who not only want, it's twofold, right? It's both desire and capability. Because I think when you'll hear from Lisa Aquino with Catholic Social Services shortly, Lisa's going to tell you that a number of the individuals who are staying at the Brother Francis shelter are in fact employed. Often seasonally, they're working at a cannery, but they're not making a living wage that allows them to sustain their housing over the duration of a year. The idea behind Path to Independence is how do we empower that population that is both capable of increasing their employment prospects and their income earning potential and has a desire to do that? How do we empower those individuals?
Thank you, because I just think the 1,200 is going to be a lot less than 1,200.
Correct.
You've got to take out those that, no matter what you do not want to live in structured housing, as we call it.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. And to be very clear, our target is not to serve all 1,200 of these individuals.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you. So we have identified this challenge, right? We say, what's our opportunity? So first and foremost, we wanted to pilot a model that engaged private landlords differently. And to be very clear, I want to acknowledge that this was catalyzed by Widener Apartment Homes. It was not as if we went to Widener Apartment Homes and said, hey guys, what would you think about engaging in a particular way? Widener Apartment Homes came to us and said, it's time that we as a private sector landlord come to the table and talk about how we can try a somewhat different approach. So the question becomes, how do we look at our homelessness issues and find a way to engage private landlords as partners, as investors, and as really enthusiastic cheerleaders, right? The idea being to move to a place where it's both the right thing to do to be part of the solution, but can we actually make this an effective business model for private landlords in some way, shape, or form, right? Second, obviously we want to quickly transition homeless individuals and families into housing, and there will likely be some, it's not going to be a substantial impact, but there will be some impact on the shelter census. If we are able to pull some of the lower acuity individuals from shelters and keep them from having recurring instances of homelessness, then that frees up entities like Catholic Social Services and the Brother Francis Shelter to focus more of their attention on some of those higher acuity populations. Obviously, we want to combine these housing interventions with employment and supportive services, and then to promote long-term self-sufficiency and try to prevent recurrent shelter stays or lapses back into homelessness. So let's talk briefly about the population we're serving. So Nancy was up here and she talked to you about this index where people are assigned a number that more or less is intended to represent their level of need. And the higher that number is, the more substantial their need is. This program is focused, at least initially in the pilot, on individuals who are between a 0 and a 6 on that scale. And in fact, some traditional models would say, hey, look, if you're 0 or 2 or 3, you don't need any assistance. You will self-resolve, right? You just had a bump and no big deal. Our approach to this is to say, yeah, maybe they will self-resolve, but maybe they will be back in the shelter in 6 months or 9 months or whatever the case may be. How do we invest in that population to ensure that they're not living on that borderline on an ongoing basis and experiencing recurring bouts of homelessness? So this population is also not a population that is going to have very significant substance abuse or very significant mental health issues. We're not talking about individuals who are likely camped out on a sidewalk and who are dealing with public intoxication to a substantial degree. We're talking about a different population. And one other unique element of this, folks will come through this coordinated entry list, right? The idea is we want to encourage individuals who are experiencing homelessness to connect with the system in a way that makes it easy to track and follow up with them. Program components. What are the elements of Path to Independence? Maybe, Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about the
Can I ask something?
Please.
Coordinated entry system for choose that the HMIS. Thank you.
Correct. So maybe, actually, how about I'll talk about financial assistance. Maybe you can talk about case management a little bit. So component number 1 is what we call direct assistance or client financial assistance. Basically what this means is that each participating family or individual will have up to $6,500 available for support, which could be rental assistance payments, it could be a utility deposit. But what's unique about this program is it could also be things like uniform purchases for a job to replace those tools that were stolen, union dues as a good example, child care assistance while someone is doing a job hunt. And the idea here is not that those individuals would get a blank check for up to $6,500. They would be working with a case manager who would help them put forward a plan to use as little of that $6,500 as is deemed necessary to help them meet their goals.
Mr. Constant.
Thanks, Gabe. Is that one time or annually?
It's one time. So the idea behind this program, Mr. Constant, is this is not a permanent intervention, right? The idea is you want to touch these folks. The financial assistance would be over the course of 6 months, and the goal is to taper that financial assistance off at the end of 6 months. But the case management component that Lisa is going to talk about would last through a 1-year period. Right? So maybe, Lisa, you want to talk about case management?
Sure. So at Catholic Social Services, housing case management is one of the major pieces of work we do in the city, and we have more employees working on that than any other agency. That's a big piece of our work, and we have different models for that intervention, for that kind of work. This model is one that we've been doing for many years. This case management for these folks who are sort of in the middle to lower end of the list in terms of vulnerability, and they need some immediate support, some help, and then that tapers off over a year. So what that looks like is, because when we talk about what the work we do, we're talking about helping transition adults and families into what we call permanent stability. And for us, that's about housing and income, and then social and emotional well-being, so connection with the community, right? And so that's what we're going to work with them and plan on, right? So when we first start working with an individual, we're going to, right away, we're going to be talking about, okay, we're going to move you into a place, but let's think about your budget, because your budget needs to match the place you're going to find, and you choose the place keeping in mind this is your budget and what you can plan on. Here's your budget today. we're going to talk about income and work on income. You want to get a better job, so let's think about that. How's the income going to change? Let's plan for now. Let's plan for 6 months. And then that connection piece is about supporting them in creating their own social networks and community in the place where they live and in the place where they work, so that when these challenges happen again, because they will, we all as people on this earth experience, challenging situations. The hope is that they're going to have a safety net that's going to help them. They're going to have some savings in the bank. They're going to have 5 good people that they can call to ask for help or advice, or they're going to be connected with the community system, because there's lots of resources here in Anchorage and the United States to help people, but a lot of people don't even know about those. So a lot of it is about that. So, and how that case management looks is it's more intensive and more time. We spend more time with the person right in the beginning, and then that tapers off. It tapers off over a year. So it goes 6 months beyond the time of financial assistance. And in our work at CSS, what we found is that case management is really the vital piece. We've had to do an experiment, not out of because we like experiments necessarily, but because we had some funding cuts. And what we found was that even when we lost the financial assistance that we could give people in another grant, not this one, it was the case management that really made the difference in the long-term success of the people. So this model is built on an evidence-based model that's been used for a lot of years. We use this with our SSVF grant with veterans, and so there's a lot of strong science and strong support that this works, and we've been doing it for a long time.
I just want to make maybe one follow-up comment from a landlord perspective. What we found in our portfolio is when that case management ends, and typically in the past, as soon as someone moves from a shelter into permanent housing, the case management stops. So this model is going to pilot that mobile case management to keep that case management in place. So the landlord still gets to be just the landlord. This is how we're going to engage the private sector. But the case management will continue to follow the individual or that family. From our experience, this is what was missing from our success path, was the lack of case management to follow those individuals or families. And we had no idea as a landlord where that individual family came from, who to call. So this program will take some of those kinks out of that system from the private sector perspective to make it easier. And I think I want to thank Lisa for her courage to step up. Obviously, in part, this program funds that, which that's the missing piece, was the funding for that case management. Certainly not an unwillingness to provide it, but we believe that's going to make a difference in the success for those individuals and families.
Thank you. So a third component of this, you've got the direct client financial assistance, you've got case management. This is part of what is a bit unique about this program. And to be clear, there are some folks who are skeptical about this element. That's why this is a pilot. We do not fully understand at this point the extent to which connectivity to employment will or will not be successful. But we absolutely believe, and our funding partners also believe, that it's darn well worth piloting in a very thoughtful and careful manner. So as these individuals are working with their case managers will connect them with opportunities to enhance their employment and earning potential. So as an example, if we're talking about individuals that are employed or have been recently employed, the question becomes, what strengths do they have that can be built upon? Is there a related certification that they might be able to achieve that would enhance their earning potential and allow them to save a little bit of additional money in case they have a life event that could, in another instance, trigger homelessness? What's really unique about this, and I might turn this over to you just to talk about briefly, Greg, is there is a component of the program that we call the LEAP component. It's the Landlord Employment Advancement Program, because every good program has to have a clever acronym. So what's really unique about this, there's a model outside that is used regionally in the Mid-Atlantic and in the South, in which private sector landlords will both house and employ individuals who have experienced homelessness. And their model works a little bit differently than what we are proposing. We've Alaska-fied it to a certain extent. But part of what triggered this was bluntly Widener saying, you know, look, we're willing to engage again in these non-traditional ways. We don't just want to write you guys a check and feel better. We want to talk about if we have vacancies, how those units can be put forward, and we also want to talk about whether there are opportunities for us to actually train and potentially employ some of these individuals. So, Greg, you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address the Assembly. And I'll keep my comments brief, but as Gabe said and as Carol had said earlier, Widener is involved because of two things. First and foremost, we're a private landlord that has built a real estate business over the last 40 years, and Mr. Widener has recognized that we have capacity throughout the United States, in Canada, and here in Alaska, from various, time to time, there's going to be vacancies there. And his overriding question to me, and as we've had these conversations, is how can we engage private landlords like ourselves to be able to give back to what's a societal problem that we're seeing throughout the states. It's not only occurring here in Anchorage, as you're aware, but homelessness issues, whether it's a veterans homelessness, whether it's native homelessness, whether it's folks who are just lost a job. We're seeing that in every single market that we operate in. And so the question is, how can we engage a group like ourselves, private landlords, to be able to take some of those resources and give back to fight this issue? And speaking with Carol and developing this program, some of the things that you see in here, these program components, are very important. Those are some of the stumbling blocks, the challenges for allowing private landlords to get involved. Sometimes it's easier to write a check than it is to do hard things and to get involved. And so our goal really is to do both. And so some of these elements are things to help mitigate the risk for us. So as we developed this program and looked at some of those components, such as let's look at that and target that group of folks that just need a helping hand up, who need a little bit of assistance that'll be short term, that tapers off as was talked about, and then they can be self-sufficient. That's great. And how does self-sufficiency happen? Well, it happens with a roof over your head. It happens with the ability to provide for yourself. It happens because you have a job that allows you to go to work and provide not only for yourself but your family. And so those elements were written into this. As we looked at that Shelters to Shutters program that Gabe talked about, there were many elements of that we thought were important, primarily putting a home over somebody's head, a roof over somebody's head. And so as we built this out, that became very important. The Landlord Liaison is important. The element that we have is case management, because as a private landlord, we're pretty good at turning an apartment and making sure there's not leaks and dealing with all the efficiencies of a building. We're not very good at dealing with some of the issues that a client base and a population like that would bring to us. And so partnering with Catholic Social Services to help provide that wraparound services so those folks can be successful not only today, not only for the next 6 months, but beyond, is really important in terms of how we think a pilot like this can transition from being short-term to something that can be self-sustainable and move into a business model that works for not only Widener, not only Cook Inlet Housing, but all private landlords. So our goal really is to see if we can make a goal of this here in Anchorage. We'd love to see this scaled up in a model like this or a program like this, be able to be utilized in other markets as well. So that's our intention. That's why we're involved, and we hope that we provided enough stopgaps so that private landlords at the end of this pilot will say, I can see myself being involved. Let me give you a quick story. I recently got an email, and a young woman had said she saw a conversation about this, the announcement that came out in April, and she said, I own a home here that has 12 rooms and 8 bathrooms, and I want to know what I can do to help out. And so I checked into the hotel yesterday, and the young lady at the front desk said, hey, I saw you guys on the news. I hope this works out. There's way too many people that need to be have a home. So these are conversations that are happening not only in my group, but clearly throughout with these folks as they're out and amongst the community. And so our goal is to try and do our part to make that happen.
Mr. Chair, there are a couple of additional program components that are really critical, and Greg, thank you for that. I think it leads into a brief explanation of these two components. If you want private landlords to engage in this way, if you want to turn what is the opportunity cost of a vacant unit into something that is productive and beneficial for our community and financially viable for that private landlord, then we need to be very cognizant of what the barriers to that landlord using the unit in that way are, right? As a private landlord, you've got debt on a building. You've got to make sure that there's some sort of financial compensation that's associated with that unit. You need to make sure that you are housing people who are going to be good neighbors. You need to make sure that you're housing people who are not going to damage property. And if those things don't work out, and they're not going to work out in every case, there needs to be some risk mitigation that protects the landlord to some degree and allows them to continue with their engagement in a way that, frankly, supports an effective business model. So as we talked with Widener and, frankly, as a landlord ourselves, Cook Inlet Housing Authority, we recognize what those barriers are. We tried to figure out how do we design this program to recognize and address those barriers head on. Step one was having a landlord liaison function. Right? Don't think of this as a person or a job. Think about this as a new system component. If you are a Widener Apartment Homes and you are willing to make some of your units available for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, you're going to have some folks who experience problems, whether they're late payers, whether they're coming from a situation where they're not used to being a renter, so they don't understand how to respect the privacy and peaceful enjoyment of their neighbors. And as a landlord, your mechanism for dealing with that are warning letters and violation notices and all very punitive stuff that doesn't get to the root cause of what's going on. A better solution is connectivity to someone that has a relationship with that individual. But if you're a Widener or if you're a Cook Inlet Housing, you may have a number of different individuals participating in a number of different programs, and they may have different case managers in those different. How do you find the right person that's connected with this individual? And it's too cumbersome to try to track it down. The system is disjointed in that way today. The idea behind this landlord liaison is to test pilot a new system component that streamlines that landlord engagement. So that function would understand the landlord, understand what their screening criteria are, who are we going to be able to place with this landlord, who's not the right fit, maintain communication with them about their engagement, all the way up to the point where if a landlord has an individual who is housed with them and there's an issue, they don't have to figure out who's the case manager for this person. They have one phone number, one point of contact, they pick up the phone, they call that person, and that person's responsibility is then to track down the case manager, and that case manager addresses the root cause of either the non-payment or the behavior or whatever the case may be. Our hope is that we will realize some success through this model and that it could potentially be brought to scale to cover more than just the Path to Independence program. That ideally you're talking about something that becomes part of our system, just like coordinated entry is for the consumer. You would have a landlord liaison function that more or less fills that role for your landlords. And then third and finally, there is a landlord risk pool function. The idea here is you are going to have some amount of damage or property loss. And how does a landlord agree to accept this clientele that presents an additional level of risk, but in a way that risk is mitigated to a certain extent? So there will be a relatively modest landlord risk pool. The idea behind that landlord risk pool, however, is not to simply pay out security deposits and watch that pool be depleted. It needs to be sustainable in some way. So Cook Inlet Housing and Widener have agreed to try something a little bit different. Instead of requiring individuals who will go through the program or those programs themselves to fund a security deposit, what we will do is essentially take 1/12 of the rent payments that come in, and that will be set aside. So let's say your rent's $1,200. You got $100 each month that will be set aside to fund that individual's security deposit. And if at the end of their tenancy there are no damages, that security deposit is refundable to the tenant. They essentially have some skin in the game, right? And it also means that you are not drawing from your landlord risk pool to pay that security deposit. Instead, it's a guarantee, so that if that security deposit is not fully funded in this way, by the time that some damage occurs, that's the point where the risk pool would kick in. it's a much more sustainable model that hasn't been test piloted in any places.
Can I
Chair?
ask about that? It's an interesting model. It's innovative. We have had a history in this town of it being difficult for low-income renters to get their security deposits back. That you do your final walkthrough, and the landlord says, "Oh, you didn't replace the fan on the grease thing, or there's a wall ding here, there's a wall ding there." In fact, I think there's even been some lawsuits about this.
Right.
How do you avoid that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great point, Mr. Chair. As we tried to figure out how this landlord risk pool would work, you have pressure on both sides, right? You don't want this to be set up in a way where a program participant sees it as free money and there are no consequences if they don't treat the unit as their unit, their property. And the flip side, we want to make sure we're working with good landlords who don't see this as free resources that they can nickel and dime. So to the latter, it's twofold. Just as we will screen program participants and make sure they're the right participants, there will actually be a process as we bring this pilot to scale and bring additional landlords on to take into consideration what is that landlord's history and their reputation. Is this program the right fit for them? But also because that landlord is themselves contributing to fund that security deposit. I mean, you're talking about a landlord who's agreeing to set 1/12 of the rent that they would otherwise take and use as profit into a security deposit that is then payable to the tenant. They're not going to nickel and dime that. And it's really interesting because at this stage, the two landlords, Cook Inlet Housing and Widener, have agreed that, if you look at it this way, right? Let's say we've got this $1,200 per month apartment. You have 1 month's vacancy. You're out $1,200 in income. But if you put one individual in there and they're successful, they go through the program at the end of 1 year, they have a fully funded security deposit, and they're paying their $1,200 a month, right? So you haven't experienced any of these vacancies. That unit has been put forward, and you now have a successful, stable tenant. They've been there for a year. So the idea is we've agreed that we would thereafter actually continue to contribute 1/12 of that individual's rent to the landlord risk pool, right? So that's a mechanism that will help make that risk pool more broadly sustainable within the community.
They still only get back $1,200, but you're sustaining the fund with
Correct.
that extra,
The-
once you've got a stable tenant.
So I think are we doing a whole other presentation after this? Am I mistaken? The pace of success?
I was
Nancy?
just thinking that this is such a valuable conversation that maybe if we could just reserve a few minutes for update, but allow this presentation to continue.
So we're going to go until 12:15. If people are able to. Mr. Croft's going to take over because I have to go to the Budget Advisory Commission. But I would like us to. What's that?
This is a work session.
This is a work session.
Can we extend for 15 minutes if it wasn't noticed?
Yes, you just make a motion to extend, that's fine.
So my intention is that we do that. But I would like us to at least touch on this. So if we could we have like 3 or 4 more slides. We get through this pretty quickly, and then we'll get some questions from the committee.
You got it, Mr. Chair. So moving along, let's talk about who's engaged, right? Who are the major players here? Widener Apartment Homes is a major funder. They've put their money where their mouth is on that. They've contributed $200,000 to this, and we're extremely grateful for their engagement. They're also the first private landlord to engage in this particular program. Cook Inlet Housing Authority is also a participating landlord. We are essentially going to be responsible for overall program oversight, administration, reporting, evaluation to make sure we understand the results. And we wanted to make sure that we were also experiencing what it was like to be a landlord in this process. And then finally, we will be housing the Landlord Liaison function. As we discussed, Catholic Social Services is going to handle both the case management function as well as the disbursement of the direct client financial assistance. And the United Way of Anchorage is the fiscal agent for the landlord risk pool. Essentially, Providence made funds available for that purpose. Those are on hand with United Way. United Way has been an extremely valuable partner in supporting Path to Independence and helping to put us in a good place with both the landlord risk pool and, frankly, also funding for the landlord liaison. But that's not everybody. This is your group of funders for Path to Independence. You're talking about 25 different public and private organizations at the state level, at the regional level. Every single ANCSA regional corporation has contributed to this effort. So clearly what you see here is that this is not just a kind of a wild idea that one or two entities had. There's a lot of broad support for this, and the idea that we are going to test out some new ideas. Some of this is going to work. There are going to be elements that will have to be adapted that won't work exactly as we thought, and we'll need to revise those. There may be some things that we find don't work at all, and if that's the case, that's knowledge that we gleaned that we did not have before. But this is a pilot, and we anticipate that today these funders have probably given us enough advanced funding to get through 16 to 18 months of pilot for this program. And then finally, these are essentially next steps. We are about to put job descriptions out on the street, begin the hiring and recruitment process for our case managers and our landlord liaison. We will then get MOUs in place with all of the entities that will provide supportive services, employment services, and we are very hopeful that we will begin taking referrals and placing people sometime in late July or possibly in early August. And with that, Mr. Chair, we're more than happy to entertain questions.
Thank you. Could I start taking a motion to extend by 15 minutes?
Second.
Second. No opposition? Okay, great. Mr. Constant.
Thanks. So Lisa, this serves 40 people. How many people do you have that you kind of classify as currently working but sheltered?
We have, well, in our program, in our Good Night, Good Day program, we probably have, what, 20 people in that, so we have specific programs that target folks like this, but we don't have any financial assistance for them. They just have to wait in shelter. And then on just the 0s to 6s, there could be so many more than that. I mean, there's at least double.
Right. So, okay, so at least double, which gets you to the number of people that would get set up in this program. Then the next question I have is, so how then do you think you internally can help prepare people who are in the 0 to 6 or maybe the 4 to 6 category who need some pre-training to become eligible to be in a program like this? You know?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think this is new in a pilot, and there's things about this that we're going to have to try. I mean, I talked about how we've done rapid rehousing with veterans and different groups, but this is exciting and amazing because it's targeting a group of people that don't have resources pointed towards them in the current sort of array of services. So I think that there's some people that might need some stabilization before they're ready to just move in, and there's people that have been stabilizing at the shelter right now. Like just today, they're stabilizing. They're going to work every morning, and then they come back at night, they eat dinner, and they go to bed at the shelter while they're saving on their own. So I think that's happening right now, and what I hope is that we can identify them quickly and move them out, and so we take some pressure off the shelter, and we get them in a much more successful position.
So those are leading questions.
Okay.
The idea that I'm thinking about is this is a great project, obviously supportable, and I contemplate often the people who are sheltered and have to come back to the shelter at night through that kind of crisis neighborhood, all the horrors they have to go through, to lay down on a mat and then get up in the morning and go back to semi-normal existence. And the idea of skill building is important because it's not just kind of stabilization, but it's skills. It takes skills to live in a place that has 4 walls and a stove and other cleaning and all the things that are needed. And I know that you guys have a building that sits at the end of, what is it, 47?
West 54.
West 54. And it seems to me that there's another component to this program that is, and this could be part 2, might not be right away, but the idea of setting up a place where people you have identified at the shelter don't qualify because all the beds are full in the 40 units, but you start training people to be able to live on their own. And that building seems like a really logical place to me because it's in the community. It's away from the crisis. These are people we're talking about who have jobs or are capable of working. So I just want to recommend that you contemplate looking at that building as an opportunity to create a pre-stage for this program for those who don't have the skills to live in the community but could because they have, you know, it's like that next tier.
Yeah.
If I may, I think that's very insightful. One of the things that would get a private landlord like ourselves and others excited about participating is just that step that you talked about. Because not only for pre-qualifying or getting somebody ready to work we have a component of this in the LEAP program where we're going to be offering jobs to those that are qualified, or that we can at least get them pre-qualified and ready to go. But oftentimes we find that folks that are not ready to live in an apartment in a close setting and multifamily existence, that's where they fall out. And so our expectation as we build this is that the caseworkers will be able to work individually with each one of those clients and get them ready, just as you say, for that next step in that transition. So it's insightful.
It is, and I'll just say we're on the same wavelength. I mean, so right now our Good Night, Good Day program, we have housing programs at Brother Francis Shelter in addition to emergency shelter, and there are people that are working programs and that are saving money to try to get into housing. I'd love to have a different place that they could be, so they're not in emergency shelter. Right. There's some reasons why it hasn't been West 54th, but I'm open and we'd love to talk about it.
And I just last follow up on that. The point of that for everyone is just know that it's not a homogenous group that's all jammed into the place at 3rd and Carla. And the fact is there are people that can be pulled out of there, that can be stabilized more easily without harmful impacts to other communities because they're stable. They're just stable and forced to be in an environment that is unstable. And so that's a subtle pitch towards moving some of the services that are provided there into other parts of town.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. I'm going to go to the Budget Advisory Commission. I'm turning the gavel over to my colleague, Mr. Croft, and I think Mr. Peters has the question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the goal is to get housing for 40 people in the first year. Are you planning to do another 40 the second year, or is it just simply a pilot program for 1 year?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. So again, the idea is there's up to $6,500 in assistance available per family, right? Catholic Social Services has operated some similar rapid rehousing programs and found that even though there's more money available, often those families can be served with $2,500 or $3,500. So while our budget contemplates 40 individuals over a 1-year period, the reality is we believe that we'll be able to extend both the timeline and the number of individuals served based on finding some internal cost savings. However, to your point, the idea is, again, to probably pilot this for at least a 2-year period, and in all likelihood that will mean an additional round of fundraising that will be less substantial than what we've done previously.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions in the Assembly? I got in a little late on it, but it sounds fabulously innovative and just what we need. And we don't want to put so much pressure on. Yeah, we'd like you to do 400 immediately, but we want to also make it work. So go at the speed that allows you to do it. And I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, just really, I think a thank you from all of us, and I want to publicly thank Widener for really catalyzing the idea. You know, we don't often have a private landlord that says we want to be part of a community solution, and I think this is big. I would just maybe express this. 25 funders. Within the first 5 minutes of describing this idea, and it was truly just an idea, we had our first $50,000 check. This community is ready to be invested in solutions. I've been very humbled by the 25 funders that just said yes to an idea without having everything tied up in a pretty little bow package. And as we've said to you and also to them, we're going to try this on. It's going to have some cracks and some things are not going to work as we thought, but I think you've got a strong team of people here that are very determined. We know why we're doing this, and if the little things distract us or cause us to have a few little curves along the way, we're not going to be distracted by why we're in this to begin with. I'm pretty proud of the fact that Widener has decided to pilot something in Anchorage, Alaska, where he got his humble beginnings, and his plan is to use this on a national scale. So we are going to pilot something that helps other communities as well, and I'm just immensely proud of that. Lisa's been incredible. We don't speak the same language. We're writing a program, and we don't know exactly how all this is going to work out, but these are folks that are ready to be part of a solution. And I just want you as the assembly to know this is an awesome community. Your leadership has mattered in this effort, and we really appreciate the opportunity to share it. So you're not hearing it, just through other community members. I hope we can come back a year from now, and we can share with you what we learned, we're going to learn, and who we help.
Well, thank you to Widener
Thank
and
you.
Cook Inlet for bringing a new idea, a new approach. It's desperately needed in this area, and for having your skin in the game.
Wish us luck.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Nancy, are you going to be able to give us good stuff in 10 minutes?
I am.
Okay.
Yep.
Go.
We can do it. Thank you. Committee, I'd like to introduce Dr. Monica Gross, who's with us from United Way and who is really the lead on our Pay for Success program. And I think echoing the words that Carol just said is correct. I've followed this committee before I moved over to the municipality, starting in 2014, I think, learning about issues, and that's just commendable. Sorry, this isn't the committee, but I usually address the committee. The homeless learning and the education process that the Assembly's undertaken is quite remarkable. So Monica and I agreed that I don't think we will go through the entire presentation, well, certainly not the entire one, but I think maybe if I just put up one slide for you to remind you that this project is perhaps, if we thought about that need continuum, the vulnerability index, and people who have those greater needs. And I think this project really addresses the question that Assemblymember Trainee was raising about the people who are not going into housing or perceived as not wanting housing. And I do need to continue to correct that perception that when we are out in camp outreach and meeting with people and speaking one-on-one, maybe not in a more public setting where someone's pride or they might feel on the spot, but one-on-one, every person, almost to a person, is wanting to go and do something other than what they're doing in that moment. And so it's just that the way that we have to address them, the financing and social service gaps that exist for people who need a more intensive approach are significant in this entire state. And this project really gets at some of the reasons why things are broken and helps us redirect it toward the solutions. You have the full presentation, and there are some options. I would like to see if the chair would consider an additional work session or asking the homeless committee to take up the July meeting. We actually have one of our technical assistance providers in the state for the July 18th meeting, so that could be a natural opportunity for us to do a deep dive in this project. And so then I think I would just like to call attention to some of the concerns. Oh, go ahead. Is there a question?
Did you ask Felix to add this into his July meeting?
Yep, just writing that down. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you. There's been a lot of public discussion and a lot of concern and issues around people who are in camps and who are participating in crime, or the perception that there is, a lot of that, the need for us to begin addressing those areas with a public safety approach. I want to call it to attention that this project is one of the interventions that we will use with those individuals. We can't arrest our way out of this. I think Alaska has learned that over the course of time, and I've heard legislators from the 2000s actually come to that conclusion. And there was a fair amount of work in reform to try to figure out other ways of doing it. Maybe those weren't perfect and aren't exactly the way we will continue. But we have to get at how we can intercept this population that's cycling through homelessness, Department of Corrections or courts, and high-cost medical care services. And so just to talk about that population, this project has now passed, if you will. The Department of Justice and HUD were in the state in May, and they reviewed our feasibility assessment with us, and they've given us the go-ahead to begin looking at the next steps on how to develop contracts for the finance and to put in place our intervention that's being developed and will be proposed. So this project, the feasibility analysis has a review of 4,300 individuals. We started with a corrections population, and of those 4,300 individuals who had 2 or more releases in the past 3 years and 1 in the last 12 months, we found that 1,218 of them had been homeless at least once in the last 3 years. Of that 1,218, we found that 769 had 3 or more encounters with homelessness over that period of time. And that brought us to the smaller focused group for our study, that 330 people measured at this high level of the needs scale that's being used in the homeless service system. So this overlap, if you think about the Venn diagram of corrections, homelessness, and high-cost medical care and cycling, is 330 people in the community. Those people aren't all out on our streets right now. They're cycling through. They continue to do this cycling through corrections, through homelessness, and as you can see, it's a significant gap in our system. This project will place itself in the middle of that. It'll be housing and corrections. The Department of Corrections is our partner on this. Service providers, it'll be a broad coalition of individuals participating with us.
Yeah, just real quick. So the last presentation focused on those who had the highest chance of succeeding, sort of get out into homes, and this is concentrating on the most difficult.
Correct.
Which approach is right?
Well, do you have diabetes or do you have cancer? It's not a which approach is right. Everybody is not the same. You know, if my doctor only thinks about one thing for me, that would never work. You really have to be individualized.
Do you mind if I jump in? So when you look
Let
at
my doctor talk to you.
when you look at homelessness, there's a continuum of homelessness. There's people who really just need diversion, and we're strengthening our 211 system to really help those people. There's people in the middle that this Path to Independence project is really identified as their target population. So people who need some short-term support, 6 to 12 months. And then there's the hardest to house, the people who need the most support and probably some level of permanent support. And this project here is geared toward that far end of the continuum.
I didn't ask it well, but it seems like a lot of government programs focus on those two extremes, and we often have a middle donut hole that we miss. That we either concentrate on the easiest to get to one area or the hardest cases because they're the most costly, and that it often, in different social service models, misses sort of a middle ground of it. And so that's all I do. But I also have Mr. Weddleton with a question.
May I respond real
Yeah.
quick to that? I mean, that's this slide. There is another project that we're not reviewing today that works a little bit more in that bubble, and that's what's really excellent about what's happening in Anchorage right now is we have people in the right sort of parts of this continuum focusing. We have the youth demonstration program, which is going more towards the middle, kind of towards the high end. I am putting this in a diagram I'll bring to when we do the community plan at the next homeless committee meeting, so that we can see how many in each of these slots, because this is the question, and I'm just so pleased we're getting to it now. It's been asked of us over and over again, how many people, what do they need, just help us get the numbers, and so this is what we're building out.
Mr. Weddleton.
I can ask one quick one. Is this extracted from the Agri-Back study? I'm just up
The Agnew-Beck is the contractor on this project.
Yes,
so
you
this
can
is,
email some links to that.
I actually can send that full report to
Yeah, I'd like
all
to
of you.
agree. I've been
For
meaning
sure.
to do it, just to take time to hunt it down. And then, you refer to this as a Venn diagram, which I don't think so, because this would imply that everybody here has gone to jail.
I was mixing my circles there.
So-
There is a Venn diagram that is the three
Oh, I got it.
components. Yes.
So, but how, just roughly then, if we have 4,300 moving in and out of jail, but 1,200 who are homeless, is that 50% of those are also landed in jail? you have an idea what this split is?
What the cycling
We have to say
is?
this is 1,200. How many
Is
of those
that
are
a-
also going into jail now?
Is that a subset? I had that
It's
same
a
question.
subset. It is.
So the 1,200 is a subset of that 43.
In other words, all 1,200 are going into.
Do you want me to put the diagram up, Monica? Would that be easier?
I was just going to, the diagram has outside, I think she's saying all of them.
So we're looking at this group right here. So these are the people in and out of corrections twice in the last 3 years. This is our group of homeless population, and this is our group of people who spend a lot of money on healthcare.
So this 1,200 isn't all people, some of these 1,200 have never gone to jail.
No. It's a subset of the larger.
It's a subset.
I think they don't have it though.
So 40.
All of those 1,200 have gone in that blue circle to jail.
Okay, that's what you're saying?
Yes.
Every one of those 1,200 has gone to jail.
They're part of that larger circle. So that we started with the larger circle, 4,300, and of those, we started boiling it down. So they're all selected from that original larger
So
circle.
also all 330 that you're focusing on have also gone to jail.
Correct.
Yes.
What about people who haven't gone to jail but they're homeless?
The requirements for this project are to look at that intersect between corrections, homelessness, and high medical cost. However, I will say there are some people who are homeless who don't go to jail who have similar needs. And this project, one of the benefits of doing a social impact bond or a pay for success type of project is it really highlights pinch points in the system or breakdowns in the system and helps you fix it. So we fix it for this group, we definitely fix it for the others that are coming on behind.
Okay, so this program's only for people who've gone to jail and they're transitioning.
Correct.
Okay, I missed that.
History of jail, homelessness, and high medical costs is the target.
Does somebody want to spend another 15 minutes, or do you want us to wrap up?
Let's do another 15 minutes.
This will lead us to an understanding of the answer to solving homelessness. I will skip that.
We have
We
the
might need
answer, but we
a little
decided
longer
to
than 15 minutes. Yes.
Move to any question, 15 more minutes.
Yeah, second. Okay, good. Then we'll go to 12:30. We'll try and cut it off there. Mr.
I
Trainer.
got a question for you. Have we addressed the issue of the people that are in prison come out, but they can only stay in Anchorage because we're the only town that has the treatment facilities they need? Because I'd like to identify those, see if there's a way to get them back to home. Because they're here because they can't go back home.
Yes.
Because the treatment facilities aren't there.
Yes. Your question is, have we addressed that? We have not. However, will we address that through this process? I believe we will know a lot more about how that works and where the breakdowns are. That's one of the nice byproducts from this project.
They stay here. There's a lot of people that would love to go home, but there's not the treatment facilities there for them. So they're stuck here in a town they don't want to be in.
Yes. Yeah. I hear that too.
Mr. Constant.
Yeah, just back on Mr. Wilson's point. It's very demonstrative. A substantial majority of the frequent flyer people, the ones who are the heavy users of all of our services, also use the jail. Because the jail is the last catchment area in our system,
Yes.
and that is gone now because of the corrections reform. Now it's literally to the shelter and then our neighborhood streets. And so the fact is they are all generally, probably to a very high majority, engaged in the police and correctional system. And any project, as Nancy kind of said, we fix it here, we fix it there. The people who have managed to have all of these problems and stayed out of jail have some very unusual assets because, these problems lend themselves to that function. And so it's just want to be really clear about that.
Thank you. And you're absolutely correct. You can choose to define heavy utilizers in many ways, but this definition, as Mr. Constant addressed, having people who are in and out of corrections, homeless, and high healthcare utilizers is a very common way to define this most expensive population group.
May I?
Yeah, let's use the
I'm
10
trying
minutes
to
left,
think
please.
about some important slides to
Right.
just touch on, and then there's some slides at the end that I want to highlight. So the data process, one of the most exciting things for me, having worked in this area now for many years, is, we in the past we've pulled off of national numbers. We've said this works in other communities, this happens in other communities. This is actually data that came from projects that are up and running. We weren't able to get all of the data we wanted because of the challenges around data sharing and just the pockets of where data is across the community. But we used a methodology that now has been verified by HUD and DOJ and is giving us a lot of confidence that this is what it will look like in Anchorage under the current scenario. And so as we do our intervention and as some of the changes that are rolling through the state of Alaska right now, there's a change in the Medicaid program that really should make access to treatment a lot easier, set to roll out in 2019 if everything goes well. We can improve upon this if everything moves forward, but status quo, we still know we can do better and we can fix some of the really big gaps in our system. So I would call your attention to, there's some detailed slides on how those, we derived that information. But then
you can't mean a 99% reduction in shelter rates, can you?
Well, if they're housed.
If they're housed.
The person's housed.
The most difficult population would have a 99% success rate in housing?
They would reduce their shelter stays by 99%. So they before housing they were in shelter however many days we have, and then after housing, for whatever reason, maybe that there was a change in their apartment and they had to go back to shelter for just a short stay and then we're back out. So that's the reduction of shelter. The retention of people in housing programs in this community is very high. In the Housing First projects.
I guess I was expecting that to be a statistic that might be achievable for the easier population, not for the Venn diagram of criminal justice, medical use, and shelter.
It's true. I mean, it is across the nation. That is what's housing retention. Now, the beauty of it is these programs really work on an individual method with people, and that we can scale the services. Sometimes people are not, they're in a place where they're rejecting it or they're not participating. They don't lose their housing if they're in a place where they're not pursuing their goals in a kind of a linear way. We scale the support services so that we just wait for that period to end, we re-engage. This dance might happen several times over the course of the first 2 to 3 years, but they stay in the housing. They don't cycle back out to homelessness.
Yeah, the key to that is the robust support services that tend to be the hardest thing to connect to these units of housing, because that's always where the cuts are. And so that's the critical ingredient to high levels of success, are the ability to deliver them whatever services they need to stay in housing.
That's the complexity, yes.
Any other questions?
It's expensive.
Okay, well, I just want to highlight this chart. If it's a confusing chart, I want to say that one of the ways that we show value in this project is through the financial resources that it takes to have a service like that. So let's just take the first one, the shelter. Under the status quo, it roughly costs the shelter $424 in the current per year per person. After intervention, because like we said, the person's only going to go through shelter if it's an absolute needed thing. We're going to be making sure they get to their next apartment if something happened. So that goes down. That means that the cost avoidance is $419. I'm pretty sure that my colleagues at the shelter are not going to say, oh, wait, here's my checkbook. I'm going to give you that money, city, because that was saved. We still need that resource there. We're not going to be picking apart resources that are already existing in the community. However, this gives us a way to talk about the value of what it means to have a person stabilized. And to Mr. Constant's point, I'll go to this nice summary chart. it's basically costing us the same to have people out in the, I'm going to say the same with a footnote in just a minute. I'm going to come back to that. The status quo is roughly the same amount of resource as doing permanent supported housing. However, the status quo is actually not really working for our neighbors and for our parks and our trail system and our psyche as a community and our business members. And so finding a way to diversify, basically we're diversifying the resources that can help stabilize this housing program through this project, looking at a way that we can stabilize the funding, because as Assemblymember Constant said, if we have the funding together, we can do these programs. It's really, it's not about not knowing what to do with people, it's about having a complete package that can support people. I do want to place a footnote here that the mayor points out, I think a very, very good point, that these are the costs that we can see and we can get our minds around. These are like ambulance pickups, the shelter costs, those things that we talked about. These are not the costs to the business community who has to clean their door stoop, or to the community that's losing things out of their backyard. Some of those unknown costs are not calculated in here, and I would argue this left chart would be much higher, much greater than it is, if we were able to think about how to capture those.
Other comments, questions?
Private security is another major cost that's starting to be picking up all around the area that isn't calculated, and it's massive.
That's true. Good point.
And one more great key point for us, or two more.
We are not alone. We have this amazing team. We have three actually. There's a technical assistance team that's around this grant. I just feel like we've been immersed with these expert minds that are helping us develop this project and think about things that are they forgot to cover finance in my social work classes. Public finance just wasn't really in it. So we have this team. Social finance is working with us thanks to United Way. Dr. Gross put in this application, and they were excited about what we were doing. And we also are bringing on the Corporation for Supportive Housing, which is a national technical assistance provider, a lead really in the country in these social impact bond projects. That's who will be with us in July, and so that's one of the other really great synergies. I'd like to have them come and walk us through presentations, maybe even share some of their outtakes from other projects that they've done. And then talk about investing, because at the end of the day, that is what I'm bringing to the Assembly, that there's an opportunity for us to invest. There's an opportunity for us to change this entire system and to really impact everyone in our community and do, as the mayor likes to say, we actually can solve this. We really can.
Yeah.
Just that it takes the state's involvement. When they did SB 91, they took the money that's supposed to be used for people leaving prison and didn't put it there. The state doesn't contribute the money. You've got this problem just gets worse every month and every year.
I completely agree. This gives a larger platform with the attention on this project and the federal partners and these outside experts. I think it gives us a little more of a voice to talk with the state as well.
Great. So you and I will email Felix, or
yes.
I'll just do it and include you.
Okay, great.
I'll ask and see what he says. If there are any other comments, sorry we kept that short. It was very interesting initial. This will be very interesting as well. We'll try to get it on the July 18th.
Yes. Thank you for your time.
We're adjourned.